The clock struck just moments ago. In the heart of the House of Commons, a moment that will go down in British political history was unfolding. Liz Truss, the former Prime Minister, stood before the chamber, a figure who had only been in office for 45 days, yet today she was about to expose something far bigger than herself. A bombshell revelation so powerful that it left even the most seasoned political figures gasping. Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, was the target, and what Truss was about to reveal would shake the very core of British politics. This wasn't just another political clash, it was a fight that could change the game forever, and all of it was happening right before our eyes. The atmosphere in the House of Commons had already been tense for weeks, but nothing could have prepared anyone for what was about to happen. The hum of daily debates, the usual political drama, today they were all drowned out by something far more compelling. Liz Truss, having served a brief but controversial tenure as Prime Minister, rose to her feet. Her movements were deliberate, her gaze unwavering as it locked onto Keir Starmer. That single moment was enough to send a wave of anticipation through the room. Silence fell over the chamber, a rare occurrence in Westminster, as everyone knew that something extraordinary was about to unfold. The camera lingered on Truss as she adjusted the microphone. She was poised, calm, yet there was a quiet intensity in her demeanour that spoke volumes. The usual sharp political jabs, the fiery rhetoric were absent. Instead, she appeared ready to deliver something far weightier, far more significant. The tension in the room was palpable. Truss wasn't just making a political statement today, she was about to reveal something that could unravel everything Keir Starmer had worked so hard to build. Behind her, the corridors of power had been buzzing with rumours. There were whispers of a dossier, an explosive document that had the potential to upend the political landscape. The morning had started like any other in Parliament, with the usual rounds of policy discussions and criticisms, but the energy was different. The air was thick with anticipation. The stage was set for a confrontation no one had seen coming. Keir Starmer, seated at the other end of the chamber, had no idea that his political career was about to face its greatest challenge. Hailed as the beacon of stability in a time of Conservative chaos, Starmer was comfortably ahead in the polls. But that was all about to change. Liz Truss, with the power of undisclosed information in her hands, had the potential to shatter that advantage in a matter of minutes. When Truss finally spoke, her voice cut through the tension like a knife. There was no grandstanding, no sensationalist rhetoric, just calm, precise words that carried weight. She wasn't speaking as a former leader, she was speaking as a witness. A witness to something far darker, something that had the potential to destabilise the foundation of British democracy itself. Her words were deliberate, measured and chilling. "I do not rise today as a former leader," she began, each syllable carrying a heavy resonance. "I rise as a witness to the deceit and danger now gnawing away at the heart of our democracy." The chamber was silent. It was the kind of moment that makes even the most seasoned political observers hold their breath. What she said next would change everything. Truss reached for the folder she had brought with her. The same folder that had been at the centre of the rumours circulating through Westminster in the days leading up to this moment. The dossier, rumoured to contain information so sensitive it could turn the entire political tide in an instant. As she opened the folder, the tension in the room escalated. She didn't immediately dive into the contents, but when she did, the House of Commons was riveted. Liz Truss began to slowly and methodically dismantle the carefully constructed image that Keir Starmer had worked years to build. Her voice was steady as she laid out the evidence, documents revealing previously undisclosed meetings between Starmer and controversial international figures. Meetings that had never been mentioned in public, meetings that directly contradicted Starmer's own statements on national security. The weight of each revelation grew heavier as she presented it. Truss's words carried the power of truth, and with each new piece of evidence, Starmer's facade began to crack. His previously composed exterior faltered, his confidence slipping, as the weight of the accusations mounted. But this wasn't just about international meetings. Truss wasn't finished. She swiftly moved on to expose a more insidious revelation, one that was even more damning. There were internal Labour Party documents, clear, irrefutable evidence that showed the stark contradictions between Starmer's public promises and the plans he had been secretly drafting behind closed doors. The documents detailed policies that ran completely counter to the Labour Party's declared commitments, particularly in the areas of spending and financial reform. The British public had been led to believe that Starmer was a man of moderation, of fiscal responsibility, but what Truss revealed was a radically different picture, one of economic plans that could reshape Britain in ways most voters had never imagined. As the documents were revealed, the entire chamber fell into stunned silence. The air was thick with disbelief. What Truss was exposing wasn't just a political misstep, it was a calculated attempt to mislead the British electorate. And with each new document she presented, the Labour Party's carefully constructed image of integrity and responsibility began to unravel. The truth was out, and there was no going back. The atmosphere was electric, filled with gasps and whispers from both sides of the aisle. For the first time in a long while, even the most hardened political journalists in the room were on edge. They had expected the usual back and forth, but this was something entirely different. The bombshell had been dropped. And now, the world would see how the rest of this political battle would unfold. It was clear that what Liz Truss had just exposed wasn't just a political challenge. It was a full-scale assault on Keir Starmer's credibility, and with it, the Labour Party's future. The game had changed in an instant, and the ripple effects would be felt long after the House of Commons session ended. The House of Commons, usually a cacophony of debate and rhetoric, now sat in stunned silence. Liz Truss had just dropped a bombshell so profound that the reverberations would be felt throughout British politics for weeks, if not months, to come. Keir Starmer, once hailed as the saviour of the Labour Party and the future of British politics, now found himself on the defensive, his carefully constructed image crumbling before the eyes of the nation. The tension in the chamber was palpable, as the Labour leader struggled to regain his composure. His usual cool-headedness, a trademark of his political persona, was nowhere to be found. Instead, his face betrayed a mixture of disbelief and mounting pressure as Truss continued to unveil document after document, each one further dismantling the narrative he had so carefully built. The media frenzy surrounding the revelations was immediate and all-encompassing. News outlets scrambled to cover the story, with reporters racing to analyse the contents of the documents that had just been laid bare. Political commentators, who had once viewed Starmer as a safe, stabilising force in the post-Tory landscape, were now questioning everything they thought they knew about the Labour leader. The hashtag #NowITrussExposes quickly began trending on social. Media and clips of her speech circulated at lightning speed. Political blogs and news websites published urgent articles dissecting the details of the documents Truss had revealed and speculating on the far-reaching consequences of her actions. For Keir Starmer, the fallout was immediate. Within minutes, his leadership was called into question by both political opponents and members of his own party. The media, which had once painted him as a figure of integrity and moderation, now turned their gaze upon his past decisions, questioning his judgment and loyalty to the country's best interests. The Labour leader found himself in the uncomfortable position of defending actions that, according to the documents, contradicted everything he had publicly championed. No longer was he seen as a principled politician with a clear vision for Britain's future. Instead, the focus was now on the discrepancies between his public persona and the hidden agenda uncovered by Truss. The Labour Party, once unified in its support for Starmer, now began to fracture. Members of Parliament, particularly those from the party's more moderate wing, began to voice their concerns. The revelations from Truss had exposed deep contradictions within the Labour leadership, and many began to question whether Starmer could continue to lead the party in good faith. Whispers of leadership challenges began to circulate, and within hours, several senior Labour figures were quietly meeting to discuss their options. The pressure on Starmer was mounting, and the cracks in his leadership were starting to show. The impact wasn't limited to the Labour Party alone. The Conservative Party, long divided and often mired in internal conflicts, now saw an opportunity to reassert itself in the political arena. Liz Truss, who had been derided by many as a failed Prime Minister, was now emerging as a formidable figure once again. Her role in exposing the corruption and deceit within the Labour Party had given her a renewed sense of relevance and purpose. Conservative MPs, many of whom had previously been critical of her tenure as Prime Minister, now found themselves praising her bravery in taking on Starmer. Some even suggested that Truss, despite her short time in office, had proven herself to be a more effective opposition leader than anyone could have anticipated. The political landscape was shifting, and the public's perception of both parties was evolving in real time. On the one hand, Truss had cemented herself as a political force to be reckoned with. Her decisive actions and bold revelations had garnered widespread media attention, casting her in a new light. On the other hand, Starmer's reputation was now in tatters. The documents Truss had exposed not only undermined his credibility, but also threatened to derail Labour's chances in the upcoming elections. With each new revelation, the Labour leader's position became increasingly untenable, and many began to wonder if the party would be able to recover from the damage inflicted by Truss. As the dust settled, the political conversation turned to the broader implications of Truss's revelations. What did this mean for the future of British politics? Had Starmer's career been irreparably damaged, or would he be able to weather the storm? Could the Labour Party rebuild in the wake of this scandal, or was the damage too great? And perhaps most importantly, how would the public respond to the revelations about their leaders? Would they see Truss's actions as a courageous stand against a corrupt political elite, or would they view her as a divisive figure playing a dangerous game for personal gain? In the days that followed, the fallout continued to unfold. Starmer, his back against the wall, began a series of public interviews and press conferences in an attempt to salvage his leadership. But his responses, carefully rehearsed as they were, could not erase the sting of the revelations Truss had brought to light. His explanations only seemed to deepen the doubts surrounding his integrity, and his approval ratings began to plummet. Within Labour, a sense of unease began to settle, in as MPs and party members realised that their leader's future was now in serious jeopardy. Discussions of leadership challenges and potential successors became increasingly frequent as the party scrambled to maintain its position in a rapidly changing political environment. At the same time, Truss's supporters rallied around her, praising her for exposing the truth. Her actions were seen as a bold move in a political landscape that had long been dominated by spin and deception. While some criticised her for being opportunistic, others saw her as a champion of transparency and accountability. Regardless of the opinions surrounding her motivations, one thing was clear. Truss had effectively shifted the balance of power in British politics, and she had done so with a single decisive move. The full extent of the consequences of Truss's revelations would take weeks, if not months, to fully unfold. But one thing was certain. The political landscape had been irrevocably altered. The Labour Party, once on the rise, was now in turmoil, and its leader's future hung in the balance. As for Liz Truss, she had emerged from the shadows of her brief tenure as Prime Minister, reclaiming her place in the political spotlight. Whether this would lead to a revival of her own political career, or whether it would mark the beginning of a new chapter for British politics, remained to be seen. But one thing was for sure. The power dynamics in Westminster had been irrevocably shifted, and the game was now afoot. As Liz Truss's bombshell speech reverberated across the House of Commons, the media quickly seized on the unfolding political drama, amplifying the stakes of the situation and turning it into an all-consuming spectacle. Within minutes of her revelation, the political world was in disarray, and the public's attention shifted sharply to the contentious new story that had gripped Westminster. News outlets across the United Kingdom began to roll out special broadcasts, dissecting every aspect of Truss's speech, the documents she had presented, and the potentially explosive implications for Keir Starmer and his political future. From traditional broadcast media to the rapidly evolving digital news ecosystem, coverage was relentless, and the story quickly escalated into one of the biggest political crises of the year. Television news programmes were dominated by expert panels and impromptu interviews, all attempting to make sense of the documents Truss had laid out before Parliament. Political analysts, many of whom had once considered Starmer an unassailable figure, now found themselves re-evaluating their positions. The weight of the evidence that Truss had revealed was undeniable, and the political ramifications were far-reaching. Media outlets scrambled to interpret the legal and financial implications of the leaked documents, and the nature of the international meetings Starmer had participated in became a key talking point. Public relations experts and political strategists weighed in, offering their analyses on the damage Starmer had sustained and whether he could recover from this revelation in time for the upcoming elections. The digital landscape was no less dramatic. Social media platforms erupted with commentary, videos and memes, many of which focused on the stunned expressions of Starmer as Truss presented her evidence. The hashtag #ChuckTrussExposes quickly became a viral sensation, and within hours, Twitter feeds were overflowing with reactions to the speech. Some commentators praised Truss for her bravery and transparency, viewing her as a political whistleblower who had done the public a service by exposing corruption. Others, however, accused her of playing politics with national security and financial stability, arguing that her actions were calculated to destabilise the Labour Party and disrupt the already fragile state of British politics. The impact on public opinion was swift and profound. Polls began to show a significant shift in favour of the Conservative Party, largely driven by Truss's intervention. Many voters, disillusioned with years of political scandals, found themselves impressed by her willingness to challenge the Labour leadership, even at the risk of alienating her own party. On the other hand, Labour supporters, who had initially backed Starmer for his perceived integrity, now found themselves questioning his leadership and judgment. His approval ratings plummeted as the public began to digest the full scale of the revelations. The gap between the Conservatives and Labour in the polls narrowed, and for the first time in months, the next general election seemed less certain than it had before. As news outlets reported on the scandal, they also began to dig deeper into the specifics of the revelations. Journalists pored over the documents Truss had unveiled, cross-referencing them with Starmer's public statements and positions over the years. The more they uncovered, the more it appeared that the Labour leader had deliberately misled the public on numerous key issues, ranging from national security to fiscal policy. What had once seemed like a minor political discrepancy now looked like a major breach of trust between Starmer and the electorate. The revelations of his past dealings with controversial international figures were a particularly damning blow, as they raised serious questions about his ability to make impartial decisions on matters of national security and diplomacy. The media's relentless coverage served not only to amplify the crisis, but also to push the political narrative in one direction. Keir Starmer's leadership was in jeopardy. By the time Starmer attempted to mount his defence in a series of press conferences, it was already clear that he had lost control of the narrative. His explanations appeared too rehearsed, too calculated, and too late. The damage had already been done. The documents Truss had revealed left little room for interpretation or dispute. The political elite had been exposed, and the public, already wary of Westminster's power brokers, began to view Starmer with increasing scepticism. Into the days following Truss's speech, the political landscape continued to shift. For Labour, the fallout was profound. Internal discussions about Starmer's future intensified, with many MPs now openly questioning whether he could continue to lead the party. Some, particularly those from the left wing of the party, called for his resignation, arguing that the trust of the British people had been irrevocably shattered. Others, from the more centrist wing, urged caution, warning that a leadership contest could further destabilise the party and alienate its core supporters. In private, many Labour figures expressed their concerns about Starmer's ability to lead, with several considering. Within the Conservative Party, however, the mood was markedly different. Liz Truss's dramatic intervention had injected new life into the party, and many MPs who had once criticised her for her short tenure as Prime Minister now praised her for her boldness and political acumen. Truss's popularity surged within the party, and her role in exposing the flaws in Starmer's leadership raised her profile significantly. Some began to speculate that Truss might make a political comeback, potentially positioning herself as a leading figure within the Conservative Party, or even as a future contender for the Prime Ministership. Her actions had cemented her place in the political spotlight once again, and many within her party now saw her as a force to be reckoned with. As the weeks passed, the public reaction continued to unfold. Protest rallies, both in support of Truss and in defence of Starmer, began to take shape in cities across the country. The debate over the revelations, particularly the issue of national security and Starmer's connections to foreign figures, remained a key focus of public discourse. Media outlets continued to press for answers, and many journalists began to question whether the scandal was only the tip of the iceberg. Truss's decision to expose Starmer's secrets had opened a Pandora's box, and there was no telling where the investigation into his dealings would lead. The revelations also sparked broader conversations about the nature of political transparency and accountability. While Truss was lauded by some for her bravery, others argued that the timing and the way in which she had chosen to unveil the documents were politically motivated and aimed at undermining Labour ahead of the next election. What had been presented as a moment of high political drama was now being analysed as a carefully orchestrated move that played into the existing power dynamics of British politics. In the midst of this intense scrutiny, the public remained divided, with opinions ranging from full support for Truss's revelations to harsh criticism of her methods. As political analysts continued to dissect the impact of Truss's actions, one thing was clear: British politics had entered a new era, one marked by fierce divisions, unprecedented revelations, and a level of scrutiny that would define the future of both the Conservative and Labour parties for years to come. As the dust settled from Liz Truss's explosive revelation in the House of Commons, the next stage of the political drama shifted to Keir Starmer's response. The Labour leader, who had once commanded an aura of composure and political sharpness, now found himself cornered, struggling to regain control of the narrative. Starmer's public appearance after the event was inevitable, but fraught with tension. His press conferences, which had once been a display of his unflappable demeanour, were now marked by a distinct sense of unease. His responses, though carefully crafted, were met with scepticism and doubt. The accusations levelled against him by Truss were not easily dismissible, and the documents she had unveiled left little room for plausible deniability. Starmer initially attempted to downplay the significance of Truss's revelations, branding them as a politically motivated attack designed to undermine his leadership and the Labour Party's credibility. In a series of televised interviews, Starmer expressed his belief that the documents Truss had presented were selectively chosen and misinterpreted, aimed at creating a false narrative of corruption and deception within the Labour Party. He framed Truss's actions as a desperate attempt to divert attention from her own party's internal struggles and its lack of a clear vision for the country. However, despite his efforts to portray the situation as an orchestrated smear campaign, the public and the media were unconvinced. The more Starmer attempted to deflect, the more the media's scrutiny intensified. Journalists from across the political spectrum began to dissect his statements, pointing out inconsistencies between his public rhetoric and the evidence Truss had laid out. Some outlets called into question his ability to effectively lead the Labour Party, arguing that the damage to his reputation was too severe for him to continue as the party's leader. The once stable Labour ship was now listing, and the question on everyone's mind was whether Starmer could right it before it capsized. In an attempt to regain public trust, Starmer's team began to circulate a series of rebuttals and clarifications, offering counter-evidence to some of the claims Truss had made. However, these efforts were met with limited success. Many saw the rebuttals as too little, too late, and not enough to quell the storm Truss had unleashed. His team's handling of the fallout also came under fire. Starmer's leadership appeared disorganised in the face of such a significant crisis, unable to craft a coherent, convincing counter-narrative. Labour's internal communications, which had once been a model of discipline and efficiency, now seemed fragmented and reactive, scrambling to deal with a situation that had spiralled out of control. Moreover, the revelations Truss had presented regarding Starmer's meetings with controversial international figures and the contradictory policy documents painted a picture of a leader willing to engage in backroom deals and secretive actions that directly contradicted his public stances. The public's trust, once bolstered by Starmer's image as a man of integrity and transparency, now seemed fragile. The narrative that Truss had set in motion, a narrative that portrayed Starmer as a leader who had misled the British people, was a hard one to undo. Even within his own party, cracks began to appear. Some Labour MPs, particularly those on the left wing, began to openly criticise Starmer's leadership. They argued that his handling of the crisis had been lacklustre and that he had failed to address the core issues raised by Truss in a meaningful way. Many of these MPs had already been disillusioned with Starmer's centrism and now saw an opportunity to challenge his authority. Calls for a leadership contest grew louder, with some suggesting that the Labour Party needed a new figurehead to lead them into the next general election. While Starmer faced mounting pressure from within his own ranks, the Conservative Party, buoyed by Truss's actions, began to unite around her. Though her brief tenure as Prime Minister had been tumultuous, many within the Conservative Party now saw her as a figure of political strength, capable of challenging Labour's dominance. In the polls, Truss's rising popularity within the party seemed to signify a potential path back to political relevance. Some began to speculate about a possible comeback, with Truss potentially positioning herself as the future of the Conservative Party, particularly if Starmer's leadership faltered. The fallout from Truss's revelations did not remain confined to the Labour and Conservative parties. It rippled through British politics as a whole, sparking debates about political transparency, accountability, and the ethics of political warfare. Some political commentators suggested that Truss's actions, while damaging to Starmer, had opened up a dangerous precedent. Exposing sensitive internal documents and strategic plans had, in their view, crossed a line, making it more difficult for politicians to operate in an environment of trust and diplomacy. Truss, they argued, had taken a risk that could ultimately erode public faith in the entire political system. Despite the controversy surrounding Truss's methods, many saw her speech as a turning point in the political landscape, highlighting the deep fractures that had developed within both the Labour and Conservative parties. Whether her revelations would have lasting consequences remained to be seen. In the short term, however, it was clear that the political chessboard had been reshaped and the next moves would be critical for both Starmer and Truss. The Labour Party's response to the crisis continued to evolve. Some party members, realising the extent of the damage, began to consider the possibility of distancing themselves from Starmer, either by publicly backing a leadership challenge or by calling for an early leadership election. Others, however, remained loyal, believing that the party could weather the storm and emerge stronger once the controversy had subsided. The coming weeks were crucial for Starmer and the Labour Party as they grappled with the fallout from Truss's revelations. In the end, Starmer's leadership faced an existential crisis. His ability to recover from the damage caused by Truss's revelations would depend not only on his political skills, but on his capacity to restore trust within his party and among the electorate. His response, his leadership in the coming months, and the ability to regain control of the political narrative would determine whether he could survive the scandal or whether his time at the helm of the Labour Party would be cut short. The political landscape in Britain is shifting in unprecedented ways, and the fallout from Liz Truss's revelations has left an indelible mark on Keir Starmer and the Labour Party. As this drama unfolds, it's more important than ever to stay informed and engaged with the latest developments. Will Starmer be able to recover from this crisis and restore faith in his leadership? Or has Liz Truss's explosive move set the stage for a new chapter in British politics? Stay tuned, as the next few weeks promise to reshape the future of the nation. If you want to stay up to date on all the breaking news, analysis, and in-depth coverage surrounding this political storm, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Join the conversation and let us know your thoughts on Truss's bombshell revelation. Do you believe she's justified in her actions? Or is this a dangerous turn for